And you need to ask the government, Ms. Merkel, why they dislike Bitcoin so much. The best promotion for Bitcoin that Bitcoin could ever imagine. If people would not buy drugs with Bitcoin, there would be no way Bitcoin could be money. Even though criminals do use Bitcoin, and even though people do drug deals with Bitcoin,
you also mentioned that German government is one of the most observation or surveillance governments. In your opinion, when it comes to Bitcoin, could you a bit more elaborate on that?
Well, it's just a matter of fact that we can observe that the German government is one of the most hostile governments towards Bitcoin that we can see. And you can see that in various examples. While you have Bitcoin ATMs all over the planet, thousands by now, you didn't have any in Germany until a couple of months ago, before a few people actually kind of dared to set some up. We do not have any exchange in Germany, like Coinbase or Binance or anything like that, for the simple reason that the government doesn't give out any license to anybody to run such an exchange, or they create barriers of entry that are so high that nobody can do it. Localbitcoins.com, for example, doesn't serve customers in Germany because the German government gives them more trouble than hardly any other government. I think it's North Korea, Iran and China are other places where local Bitcoins doesn't quite work, and Germany. So
sorry for interrupting you. According to you, what is the reason of being so unfriendly to Bitcoin?
And you need to ask the government. I can only make some educated guesses, but you see, Germany is the financial powerhouse of Europe. Germany's wealth depends on the euro. It is not a coincidence that other European countries, especially the southern countries, are doing economically bad while Germany is doing economically very well. People today, almost 2 decades after the euro was introduced, realize that it was true when a lot of people back then said that it's a really bad idea to have a weak economy like Italy's and a strong economy like Germany's to sit in the same currency boat, to share the same currency, because the weak economy cannot devaluate its currency against the currency of the strong economy, which is usually the way how they can stay competitive. Since we have these economies of different strengths and different potential, using the same currency, this is not possible anymore, and that is of an absolute advantage to the stronger economy. It makes the stronger economy even stronger. So Germany has that advantage now. The euro is an absolute significant economic advantage for the German economy, and maybe that is the reason that any suggestion that we could replace the euro with something better like Bitcoin finds so much resistance in Germany. This is my guess. Feel free to ask the German finance minister or Ms. Merkel why they dislike Bitcoin so much.
Is it possible to consider that state regulation increase the demand for cryptocurrency?
In the end it will. State regulation, especially if you think about, there's different topics. There's a topic of monetary oppression, which means the government defines that you cannot buy a product from a person in Iran, you cannot send money to Iran, or we have funny circumstances there. For example, it is entirely legal in Germany to sell products from Cuba. It is entirely legal. But there is a 60-year-old law in America that declares a boycott on Cuba and Cuban products, on Cuban cigars and Cuban rum. And because all the financial institutions like MasterCard, Visa Card, PayPal are all American companies, they enforce American law in Germany, and that's why you cannot buy Cuban rum in Germany, because banks are enforcing 60-year-old nonsense American laws all over the world. So that's one part of it. Most people don't care about that. Most people think, well, I don't need Cuban rum, I take Jamaican, or I don't have friends in Iran who I want to send money to, so that's not the big problem. But the monetary policy in itself is what will drive people to Bitcoin. If you imagine your money in your bank loses value every year due to negative interest rates, due to inflation. If your bank makes some wrong deals and loses a few billion, then your money will be bailed in to save the bank. I mean, these are regulations, and the tougher these regulations are, and the more they hit people, the more people will move towards Bitcoin. It's like literally financial regulation is the best promotion for Bitcoin that Bitcoin could ever imagine. It's like, but by now I say we could actually just sit back and do nothing and not promote Bitcoin at all, because the best promoters of Bitcoin by now are governments and banks by making completely crazy, irrational financial politics and monetary regulations. I hope that this financial collapse that is upon us will not be a sudden one that creates absolute turmoil and chaos and people not getting food and so on and so on. I would hope that it is a slow decline of the fiat world to allow a slow adoption of the new Bitcoin monetary system. Also because I think, that's what I mentioned. You have, like, amongst gold bugs and amongst some Bitcoiners, you have people who actually are looking forward to this crash because they say, then I will be proven right. You know, I've said you doomsday is upon us and now it's coming, now I'm right. But I don't think anybody would want to wish that, because this is not going to be a nice moment. This is not going to be a good time for anyone, also not for people who have Bitcoin. Maybe this is what I said, what you meant.
It is often said that Bitcoin is used by criminals. Would you agree in saying that that to some extent all of us could be called criminals, considering that what we are doing today basically could be called a crime in different jurisdictions of the world?
You know, the government will declare everything a crime that they feel like they want to declare a crime. What the government declares a crime has got nothing to do with morals or ethics or justice or anything like that. I mean, just look at all the people in the United States sitting in jail for life without parole for having had some dried plants, some hemp, some marijuana, whatever. What was your question again?
Would you agree in saying that to some extent
Of course criminals are using Bitcoin. Thank God criminals are using Bitcoin. Thank God people are buying drugs with Bitcoin, because if people would not buy drugs with Bitcoin, there would be no way Bitcoin could be money. Bitcoin is money, and people do with Bitcoin everything they do with money. And money is one part of every economic transaction on the planet. Of course it is also one part of every criminal transaction on the planet. And the whole discussion about that is actually pretty absurd, because even though criminals do use Bitcoin, and even though people do drug deals with Bitcoin, more criminals use the US dollar, and more criminals use the euro, and more drug deals are being paid in US dollars and in euros than in Bitcoin. So I think that the discussion is literally obsolete. And I want to point out one thing. The real crime is done through the banking system. The real crimes are committed by the banking system. What do I mean? Every major global bank has money laundering problems. They all pay huge fines. You don't find one bank on the whole planet, maybe you find one, I don't know, that is not involved in really evil criminal stuff they're doing. And this has unbelievable aspects, like, for example, HSBC, English bank, was found guilty of having laundered more than $100 billion for the Sinaloa drug cartel in Mexico, more than 100 billion over the course of about 10 years. And the Sinaloa drug cartel, in the course of these 10 years, has killed an estimated 10,000 people. And the highest prosecutor of the United States gives a press conference and tells people, we cannot put the bankers of HSBC to court for the money laundering, because if we would do that, we would also have to put them to court for aiding mass murder in 10,000 cases. And if that would happen, we would have to smash HSBC, and if we would do that, the whole economy collapses. So you literally have the highest guy in charge of justice in the whole of America telling us that bankers can get away with aiding 10,000 murders, because otherwise the economy would collapse. I'm pointing this out to just show you real crime really doesn't need cash. It's the banks, and the banks know this. You know, I talk to banks. Sometimes banks book me to hold a lecture there or give a talk or something. And literally after my talks, usually the first question from the bankers is, but what about money laundering and criminal activity? And I make myself the fun before I hold a talk for bankers. I give it a 5-minute online research about that bank. 5 minutes are enough with every bank to find out a whole list of criminal stuff that they have been found guilty. So the question from the bankers is like, oh, but what about tax evasion? I go like, and money laundering. And I go like, but you are bankers. You know that every drug lord, every terrorist, everybody who wants to launder money, what do? They go to their bank, and their bank launders the money for them. Then the next answer from that same banker will be, oh, that's the other banks, not us. And then my answer will be, oh, look, I made a little list here about the tax evasion cases of your bank. If you want to talk money laundering, we can talk about money laundering. And then the discussion is over. So to me, the whole discussion is about people are doing illegal stuff with Bitcoin, people are laundering money with Bitcoin, is pretty absurd in the light of the crimes that are actually happening on government and banking level.